September 26, 1983. 12 minutes past midnight. Serpukhov, 15, Soviet Union. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is sitting in the duty officer's chair at the Oko Nuclear Early Warning System Command Center, 100 kilometers south of Moscow. The facility is buried underground. Its purpose is to monitor American intercontinental ballistic missile launches via satellite and provide the Soviet military command with the earliest possible warning of a nuclear attack. The warning time between detection and impact is approximately 25 minutes. The time between detection and the duty officer's required report to high command is 4 minutes. Petrov has been on duty for several hours. It is a night shift. Nothing has been unusual. The consoles are running normally. The satellite feeds are clean. At 12:14, the alarm sounds. The main display screen, which Petrov has been watching for hours without incident, switches from its normal state to a single word in large red characters. Launch. One American intercontinental ballistic missile has been detected. The satellite has confirmed the launch signature. The system is reporting with the highest confidence level available to it. Petrov has 4 minutes. The protocol for this situation is not ambiguous. The duty officer reports a detection to the senior officer on duty. The senior officer reports to the general staff. The general staff notifies the senior political and military leadership. The leadership makes a decision about response. The protocol exists because a decision about nuclear retaliation is not a decision the lieutenant colonel sitting in an underground facility at midnight is authorized to make. It is a decision that belongs to men at the top of the Soviet command structure, men who have the authority, the information, and the responsibility to respond to a nuclear attack on the Soviet Union. Petrov does not pick up the phone. He looks at the screen. He looks at the data coming from the satellite. He thinks about what he knows and what he does not know. What he knows. The system is reporting a launch. The confidence level is high. The satellite is functioning. The detection is real in the sense that the satellite has observed something and classified it as a missile launch. What he does not know, whether the satellite is correct. The thought that is forming in Petrov's mind in the seconds after the alarm sounds is not a thought about protocol. It is a thought about logic. If the United States is launching a nuclear first strike against the Soviet Union, the question is not whether they would launch. The question is how they would launch. A nuclear first strike is not a single missile. A nuclear first strike, in the strategic doctrine of both superpowers in 1983, means a massive coordinated launch designed to destroy the enemy's retaliatory capability before it can be used. The entire logic of first strike is that you must destroy enough of the enemy's nuclear forces in the first wave to prevent a retaliatory strike that would destroy you in return. A single missile cannot do this. A single missile is not a first strike. A single missile is, from a strategic logic standpoint, almost meaningless as an act of war because it guarantees retaliation without achieving any of the objectives that would make retaliation survivable. Why would the United States launch one missile? The question does not have a good answer. And in the absence of a good answer, the most likely explanation for what the system is showing is not that the United States has launched one missile. The most likely explanation is that the system is wrong. Petrov knows this reasoning is not conclusive. The system could be right. The United States could have launched a single missile for reasons he cannot anticipate. There are scenarios, however unlikely, in which a single launch makes strategic sense. An accident, a rogue launch, the beginning of a graduated escalation intended to signal resolve. He cannot rule these out. What he can do is wait and watch and think. For the seconds he has remaining before protocol requires him to either report or not report. At 12:15, the screen changes again. Launch. Launch. 2 missiles. Now 3. Now 4. Now 5. The system is now reporting 5 American ICBMs in flight, inbound toward the Soviet Union. The confidence level remains at the highest category. The satellite is reporting with maximum certainty. The display is showing what was built to show when the United States launches a nuclear attack. Petrov has less than 3 minutes. The logic he had been applying to 1 missile does not automatically apply to 5. 5 missiles is not a first strike in the strategic sense. You cannot destroy Soviet retaliatory capability with 5 missiles, but it is no longer obviously the signature of a system error in the way that one missile was obviously anomalous. 5 launches could be the beginning of something larger. 5 launches could be a test of Soviet response. 5 launches could be the leading edge of a first wave that the satellite has detected at its earliest point. Or 5 launches could be a system that made one error and then made for more errors in sequence because the same underlying malfunction produced the same incorrect output 5 times. Petrov is looking at his staff. They are looking at him. The other operators in the facility know what the display is showing. They know what the protocol requires. They are watching the duty officer to see what he will do. Petrov looks at the ground radar data. The ground-based radars, which track objects in the atmosphere rather than in space, are showing nothing. An inbound ICBM on its terminal trajectory would appear on ground radar. There is nothing on ground radar. This is significant but not conclusive. The missiles, if real, may not yet have reached a point in their trajectory where ground radar would detect them. The radar silence is consistent with both genuine launches at an early stage and with a false alarm. Petrov makes his assessment. He picks up the phone. He calls his superior. He reports that the system is showing 5 American missile launches. He reports that he assesses a detection as a system malfunction. He reports that he is not passing the alert up the chain. The words he uses in the account he gave in subsequent interviews were, "I have a feeling this is not genuine." A feeling. The Soviet nuclear response protocol, in a situation where the early warning system was reporting 5 inbound American ICBMs, was being decided on the basis of a feeling held by a lieutenant colonel who had been on night shift for several hours in an underground facility south of Moscow. This is not a criticism of Petrov. It is a description of what the situation actually was. The protocol existed to remove individual judgment from the response to a nuclear attack. The protocol required reporting. The protocol did not require the duty officer to assess whether the detection was genuine. Assessment was the responsibility of the people higher up the chain who would receive the report and make the decision about response. Petrov's job was to report. He was making a judgment that the protocol was specifically designed to prevent him from making. He was also correct. The 25 minutes passed. No missiles arrived. No nuclear weapons detonated over Soviet territory. The ground radar systems, which would have detected inbound warheads on their terminal approach, continued to show nothing. The satellites, which continued to report the launches for a period after the initial detection, eventually cleared. The system returned to its normal state. Stanislav Petrov sat in his chair and understood that he had been right. He also understood, in the way that a man who has just done something unauthorized understands things, what the next hours and days were likely to involve. The investigation that followed was conducted by the Soviet military and the organization responsible for the early warning satellite system. The technical cause of the false alarm was eventually identified. A rare alignment of sunlight reflection off high-altitude clouds had produced a signature that the satellite sensors had classified as missile launch plumes. The satellite had been doing exactly what it was designed to do, which was to detect heat signatures consistent with ICBM launches. The heat signatures produced by the sunlight reflection were, in the specific geometry of that night, consistent enough with genuine launches to exceed the system's detection threshold. The system had not malfunctioned in a technical sense. It had functioned correctly and reported what its sensors showed. What its sensors showed had been the wrong thing. This is the nature of sensor-based early warning systems under real operational conditions. They are built to detect specific signatures and report when those signatures exceed a threshold. The threshold is set as a balance between sensitivity and false alarm rate. Set the threshold too high, and you miss radar launches. Set it too low, and you generate false alarms. The OCO system's threshold had been set at a level that, on September 26, 1983, in the specific conditions of that night, produced 5 false detections from a sunlight reflection. The investigation concluded that the system had performed within its design parameters. The investigation also concluded that the duty officer had not followed protocol. Petrov had not reported the detection as protocol required. He had made an independent assessment and acted on it. In doing so, he had prevented the detection from reaching the Soviet military command, which would have received a report of 5 inbound American missiles and been required to assess whether to respond. Whether the Soviet command, receiving that report, would have ordered a retaliatory strike is a question that cannot be answered with certainty. The men who held that authority in September 1983 were operating in a political environment of extraordinary tension. The month before, on September 1st, Soviet air defense forces had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing all 269 people on board, after the civilian aircraft had strayed into Soviet airspace. The international reaction had been severe. Soviet-American relations were at their lowest point since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Soviet political and military leadership was operating under a genuine belief, documented in the intelligence assessments of the period, that the United States under Reagan was preparing for a nuclear-first strike and that Soviet early warning systems needed to be interpreted with maximum alertness. This context matters because it means that the men who would have received Petrov's report, if it made it, were not men in a relaxed strategic environment assessing an anomalous sensor reading with clinical detachment. They were men who believed, based on the intelligence picture they were working from, that the threat of American first strike was real and present. They were men who had been told by their own intelligence services that American political rhetoric and military exercises of the period were consistent with preparation for a nuclear attack. The report of 5 inbound American ICBMs would have arrived on desks that were already primed to receive it as confirmation of what the intelligence picture suggested. What would have happened next is the question that historians of nuclear close calls have been unable to answer with confidence for 4 decades. The most careful assessment, produced by researchers who have had access to both Soviet and American archives since the end of the Cold War, is that a Soviet retaliatory launch in response to the false alarm was unlikely but not impossible. The Soviet nuclear command and control system had multiple layers between the early warning report and an actual launch order. Senior military officers, political leaders, additional verification requirements. The system was designed to prevent accidental launch. But systems designed to prevent accidental launch are operated by human beings in specific historical moments with specific pressures and specific beliefs about the nature of the threat they face. In September 1983, the specific historical moment was one in which Soviet leaders were genuinely concerned about American intentions, in which the shooting down of KL-007 had created a crisis of international perception, and in which a report of 5 inbound American missiles would have arrived as apparent confirmation of the worst fears the intelligence services had been expressing for months. Petrov did not know any of this when he made his assessment. He knew what his sensors showed and what his logic told him about what his sensors showed. He knew that a single missile did not make strategic sense as a first strike. He knew that 5 missiles did not make strategic sense as a first strike either, though the argument was stronger for 5 than for 1. He knew that the ground radars were showing nothing. He had a feeling. The feeling was correct, and because it was correct and because he acted on it instead of following protocol, the report did not go up the chain. The men at the top of the Soviet command structure did not receive, on the night of September 26, 1983, a report of 5 inbound American ICBMs. They went to sleep without knowing that their early warning system had spent several minutes reporting a nuclear attack that was not happening. The investigation that examined Petrov's decision did not court-martial him. It did not decorate him. It noted that he had violated protocol and that his violation had produced no adverse consequences because his assessment had been correct. It noted implicitly the inverse, that if his assessment had been incorrect, his violation protocol would have meant that the Soviet command structure did not receive warning of an actual nuclear attack in time to respond. His independent judgment had been correct in this instance. It could have been catastrophically wrong. He was reprimanded for improper record-keeping during the incident, not for his decision about whether to report. For the logs. Petrov was reassigned within months. He retired from the Soviet military in 1984. The year after the incident, he returned to the town where he had grown up, near Moscow, and lived quietly. The incident was classified. He did not discuss it. The men he had reported to did not discuss it. The Soviet government did not acknowledge it. The world did not know that on September 26, 1983, the Soviet early warning system had reported a nuclear attack that was not happening, and that the man responsible for reporting had decided, on the basis of logic and a feeling, not to report it. The world learned about it in 1992, when the Soviet Union had ceased to exist, and a Russian general discussed the incident at a conference in Maryland attended by American and Russian military officers working on post-Cold War security cooperation. The general mentioned the 1983 false alarm in the context of a discussion of nuclear safety. An American researcher in the audience asked for more details. The story began to come out. Petrov was located and interviewed. He was living in a small apartment in Fryazevo, a town northeast of Moscow. He was in his 60s. His wife had died. He was living on a pension that was not large. He was not famous. He had never been publicly identified as a man who had made the decision on the night of September 26, 1983. Most people who knew him had no idea what he had done. He gave interviews with a matter-of-factness that struck everyone who spoke with him. He did not describe his decision as heroic. He described it as professional. He had assessed the information available to him and drawn a conclusion. The conclusion had been correct. He had done his job. The fact that his job, on that particular night, had required him to deviate from protocol in a way that, if he had been wrong, would have meant not warning his own country of an incoming nuclear attack was something he acknowledged without apparent anxiety. He said in one interview that he was not proud of what he had done. He said he simply did what seemed right at the time. He said that if he had sent the alert, no one would have blamed him. He was doing what he was supposed to do, but he had a feeling. The phrase keeps appearing in his accounts of the night. A feeling, not a calculation, not a certainty, not a confident assessment based on comprehensive analysis. A feeling that what the system was showing was not real, combined with enough logical reasoning to make the feeling actionable. This is unsatisfying as a description of how a decision of that magnitude should be made. It is accurate as a description of how it was made. The Soviet nuclear early warning system on the night of September 26, 1983, reported 5 inbound American ICBMs to a duty officer who had a feeling it was wrong, who thought about it for the time available to him, and who decided not to pass the report up the chain. His feeling was correct. The report did not go up. The chain was not activated. The decision about whether to launch a retaliatory strike against the United States was never made because the man who would have triggered that decision chain decided, on the basis of a feeling and some logic, that the system was lying. The world did not end that night, not because of policy, not because of treaty, not because of the careful architecture of mutually assured destruction that both superpowers had spent decades constructing, because of a man in an underground facility south of Moscow who looked at a screen showing 5 inbound American missiles and thought, that doesn't make sense. The recognition that followed the story's emergence was slow and uneven. Petrov received a World Citizen Award from a United Nations association in 2006. He received the Dresden Peace Prize in 2013. A documentary film about his story was released in 2014. He was invited to speak at the United Nations. He spoke simply and without drama about what had happened, as he always did. He died on May 19, 2017, in Fryazevo. He was 77 years old. His death was not immediately reported. A German activist who had been trying to reach him for weeks to discuss an upcoming award ceremony eventually determined that he had died months earlier. The announcement of his death came in September 2017, for months after it had occurred. He had lived alone. The neighbors had not immediately noticed. The man who may have prevented a nuclear war died alone in a small apartment and was not immediately missed. This is not a commentary on the ingratitude of history, though it is that too. It is a description of the specific way in which the most important things are sometimes decided, not in command centers with presidents and generals and the formal architecture of international security, in underground facilities at midnight, by men on night shift who have a feeling in 4 minutes to decide what to do with it. Stanislav Petrov had 4 minutes. He used them to think. His thinking was correct. The missiles were not coming. The world did not end. He went home in the morning and did not tell anyone.